Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So we're on to part 2 now. I'm not sure if it's going to be part 2 or day 3 because we're on day 3. I'm not sure how I'm going to title these yet, but I just edited the last video and it was over 20 minutes long. So it's going to be, like I said, a very long story, but I want to do this to share awareness. Also just as my own way of kind of dealing with what happened and working through the trauma. So yeah, we're gonna get started on this next part. All right, so one thing I forgot to mention from the night before, the Monday night, is that when everybody from the community was sending me their different lawyer recommendations and people that they trust, I for the most part just kind of thanked people. I was feeling very overwhelmed and I already had a set of lawyers that I trusted. However, I had a neighbor who reached out to me with his lawyer recommendation, and I decided to hear what he had to say because I knew he had been through some issues in the past needing to use this lawyer. I also knew that him and his family had lived in the country for a very long time, and I trusted his opinion. We're gonna call him Brian. So my neighbor Brian basically was trying to talk to me. He was out of the country at the time, but you know, he cared about my husband and our family and was just trying to see how he could help in any way, and suggested that I reach out to his lawyer for a second opinion. And in that moment, I decided that a second opinion absolutely couldn't hurt. So he gave me the contact and I messaged his lawyer. We're gonna call her Michelle. I need to keep all these names straight. And I had messaged her, and she messaged me back that evening and basically told me that we could meet the next day at 2:30, and that she would get information on the case and just see that everything was going okay. So when I woke up Tuesday morning, I went to the police station at 6:30 in the morning to bring my husband breakfast and asked if I could see him and speak to him, and I was denied, and they said I could come back at 9:30 and that I would be able to talk to him and kind of see how he's doing and tell him what's going on. So I went over to my parents' house because they were having issues with their banking because of all the bank runs we had done the day before. Some of their cards were locked, and they were also having issues calling from their phone. So I was at their house for several hours on hold, trying to get their cards unlocked. At the same time, my daughter had messaged me from home. This is just one of those side tangents, but I have it in the notes that she messaged me a photo of our dog who had porcupine quills all in its face. Never have we had an issue with porcupines in Nicaragua, but it just so happened that day and that moment that he needed to be brought to the vet. He is fine now, but again, just a side tangent. So I went back to the police station after that at 9:30 again to try and see my husband, because they told me I could at 6:30, and you're going to see that this is a running theme and trend throughout this entire story. Even though they told me I could see him at 9:30, they did not. And it's not usually a case where I just go in there and they say no. It's usually they make me wait several hours and then eventually tell me no. So at this point, I had been speaking to Mark, and he told me that we could meet at the police station at 12:30 because he'd be able to help get me to be able to see my husband, because we wanted to fill him in on all the things that we spoke about with the lawyer. So at 12:30, I was back at the police station, and we didn't end up being able to see my husband until 1:30. And these times are important because, like I had said, I had a meeting with the other lawyer, the Michelle, for the second opinion at 2:30. So we didn't get to see him till 1:30. When he came into the room, he looked white as a ghost. He was very emotional. They had just woken him up, so he was really out of it. But Mark was in the room with me, and we were in the police chief's office, and we were able to talk to him about, very briefly, but about everything that we had spoken about with the lawyers and what he was facing as far as jail time or mediation, and just all the details as quickly as we could. And then at that point, Mark left the room, and it was just the police chief. And the police chief then, for the next 45 minutes, spoke about how she thinks all lawyers are bad and that we don't need any lawyers at all, and just went on this long tangent about how we didn't need any lawyers. So by the time the meeting with my husband was over, it was 2:30, and I had totally forgotten about time while I was in there. When I got out, I remembered that the the second opinion lawyer would be there soon. I knew she was coming to the police station prior to meeting with me to just get some information. So I was trying to get out of the building as quickly as possible. I hadn't told Mark that I was getting a second opinion because I just didn't want him thinking I was questioning his choice of lawyers. I didn't want that awkward situation. So I was trying to get out of the building as quickly as possible. My mom and I were waiting outside the building because Mark was still at the counter speaking to the police. And at that very moment, a lady walked in. And again, I didn't know who Michelle was at this time. I hadn't met her yet, but I could just tell she was dressed so immaculately in these bright, bright colors. And she just had an air about her. And the way that she walked in, I just knew that was the second opinion lawyer. And so she walked up to the desk asking for information about my husband's case at the same time that Mark was still speaking to the police officers. So my mom and I were just like, this is super awkward, like trying to get out of there. And Mark then came out to us and had asked for a ride home. But I knew that I needed to speak to this lawyer. So again, it's one of those moments where I just felt like, is this real life? Is this actually happening right now? So he asked for a ride home and we said yes. And at that very moment, the police officer who was still at the desk pointed to us because I guess she had asked about our case and was like, oh, well, that's the wife there. And so Michelle, the lawyer, turned around and said, Allison. And I said, yes. And I said, hang on a sec, Mark, and walked because he didn't know who she was. And I walked over to the lawyer and again, she had a translator with her because she knew I spoke some Spanish, but it was just easier that way. So anyways, when I got over to her and I was speaking to her, she was extremely angry. And I guess what happened is that when she was at the desk talking to one police officer and Mark was talking to a different police officer, she heard the impression that, or she was under the impression that he was saying we don't need a lawyer, when really he was also angry that the police chief was saying we didn't need a lawyer. But she misunderstood it and thought that he was also saying we didn't need a lawyer, and she didn't know who he was. So I was trying to explain that because she knew I already had lawyers. So I was trying to explain to her, I don't know how complicated, I don't know if you guys are following, but I was trying to explain to her that this is the guy I'm working with his lawyers, because she already knew I had other lawyers, and that no, he doesn't think I don't need lawyers. He was just upset that the police chief was saying that to us. So it was this whole thing. It was super awkward, but that got cleared up. I basically spoke to her and the translator inside for about 30 minutes after that, just about the case, while my mom and Mark waited outside for us. And in the end, she was like, because she's from the next town over and that's where a lot of the government buildings are, she was basically like she was going to go get more information and get back to me, but it was good to meet me. And then we said goodbye and I came out to Mark and my mom to drive him home. And in that moment I just had to be honest and say I'm just getting a second opinion, you know, like I want to do everything I can for my husband. And so that's who that lady was, and luckily he was okay about it. But like in that moment I was just so panicked because they were both there at the same time and I hadn't told one about the other. So anyways, that was the police station. And then as we were driving Mark home, at some point, again, I don't remember all of the details, but at some point he let us know that the man who had passed away had a wife and children as well, which will become more relevant later in the story. So at this point, when we said goodbye to Mark, we were under the impression that the next day we would be meeting the family in person, and I would be reading my letter to them, and we would be talking about mediation, and that would all be happening the next day. So I went home to write the letter and just get ready for that. While I was at home, I got a message from the second opinion lawyer, Michelle. And she messaged me saying that she had stopped by the police station, the bigger one in the next town over, and that the family of the man who passed away had stopped by. This is what the police station told her, that the family of the man who passed away had stopped by that day and was extremely angry that nobody had contacted them about the death and nobody had reached out to them at all. Now, I was completely in shock because Mark and the lawyers had both told me that not only have they contacted the family, but that they know the family. So I was very confused, and and she just kept messaging me like, this is really bad, you need to contact your lawyers right away. Like the first thing that happens when there's an accident in Nicaragua is that you need to contact the family that was impacted. And I was under the impression that they had been contacted. Not only that, that I was meeting them tomorrow. So I was so confused. Sorry if I'm jumping all over the place. I'm just trying to get like the main points out, but not talk forever. This story will go forever. So at that point, I was confused more than anything, and I reached out to Mark right away, and it was evening time. And he told me and my mom to come over right away. He wanted to speak in person about what this other lawyer had told me, and we were at his place for like 2 or 3 hours, where we sat there with him, and he just reassured us of everything. Some of my notes here, he basically said that the family understands and that they want to mediate, they've been contacted. And I asked him, like, how long have you worked with these lawyers? Because I'm just questioning everything at this point. And he said he's been working with them for 6 years. He assured me that everything was happening, that the family meeting was happening the next morning at 10 a.m. The funeral was happening that day. He had a funeral. So the man that was friends with the lawyer, who was friends with the family, had attended the funeral that day. And so he had video of that. He had all the, I don't even know the word, all the reassurance in the world that he has no idea what this other lawyer is talking about, and that that everything is fine, and that we're going to meet the next day. During this time, he even had different people stop by that he had personally worked with for legal issues as well, and were just giving me all the confidence. They were just coming over to tell me, like so many different people from the community who I'd never even met before were telling me how amazing Mark is and how I should trust him and everything's going to be okay. And he's the only one that, can help my husband out, and he's like our best shot, and all of this stuff. So my mom and I left confident, but very confused at this point, because we were trying to understand what would be the motivation of Michelle, the other lawyer, to tell us this. Like, was she just wanting to work on the case with us, or was everything Mark saying a lie? Also, another side tangent, at this point my stepdad had been with my kids during the time that my mom was with me, because we were out of the house, as you can imagine, like at least 12 hours a day running around, and so he was with them for a lot of the time, and their trip was coming to an end, but when my husband was first put in jail, they wanted to stay until he got out. But this was the first day that the health of my stepdad started to decline a little bit, and that'll come up later in the video. So basically that night I went to bed not feeling completely confident, not knowing who to trust, and just telling myself that, the next morning is the meeting with the family, and so I'm going to find out either way. So when I woke up that morning, it was 6 a.m. and the first thing I woke up to was a message from someone who was bringing my husband food. So at this point, another neighbor started a food train for my husband, which was honestly one of the most helpful things that that the community did for us. They set up kind of a sign-up system where people could sign up to bring him breakfast, lunch, or dinner at the police station. And given the fact that we were constantly out of the house and with lawyers and running around, that became invaluable. So someone had signed up to bring him breakfast that morning, but they were under the impression that he had been moved to the next town over, because that is what Mark had told us was going to happen, but he never ended up getting moved to the next town over, so he was still in our town. So no one was there to give him breakfast, basically. So I got up and immediately went and brought him breakfast. This is also the first time that I found out I could bring him clothes as well, because they handed me a bag of his clothes that were absolutely drenched, as if you had just dipped them in a pool. They were so wet. So the cell in Nicaragua is just a cement box, essentially. It's just a tiny room. I think they can have up to, it's either 6 or 8 cellmates in the room. There's no beds, there's just cement pads. There's no toilet or sink or anything. There's just a hole in the floor and a bucket of water that they can splash on themselves. It's incredibly hot in Nicaragua, but not only that, these were the hottest months of the entire year. So anyways, when I got his clothes, it was just absolutely all sweat, which made me really nervous for him as well, just knowing how hot it is. And they told me that I could bring him other clothes. So that's when we set up a system of food and clothes. When I got home from dropping off breakfast, that is when my neighbor, Brian, had messaged me because I think his lawyer, Michelle, had messaged him about what she found out at the police station, and he wanted to know like what's going on, why is she saying this kind of thing. And I just remember sitting there because I was questioning both lawyers at this point and not knowing what to do. It was 7 a.m. and I said, can I come over to your house? And like, he was our neighbor, but I didn't know him that well at this time, but he said, yes, absolutely, come over. This is hard to talk about because this is just one of the most emotional moments in this. I mean, there's many of them, but I got to their place and I sat down and basically just told them everything that I have in this video so far about what the other lawyers are saying and what their lawyer is saying, and that how I'm absolutely confused and why would their lawyer say that if I have a meeting with the family this morning at 10 a.m. and that I don't know what to do. While I was talking to them and telling them all of this, Michelle, the lawyer, was messaging Brian again, and basically saying that she had been to the office already that morning, and that the family is extremely angry and that they're about to file an accusation. And once this accusation, basically, as far as my understanding, once an accusation is filed, then mediation is no longer an option. It's just jail time. So she's sending these really scary messages, and at the same time, I have Mark telling me that we're meeting with them. Brian's wife was like, well, if you have a meeting at 10 a.m., you can't be wearing that. Basically, I think I was wearing a tank top and shorts, and she's like, I'm confused why your lawyers wouldn't tell you that when you go to a government office or like anything official in Nicaragua, like you need to have everything covered. You need to be wearing different clothing. Like, come with me, I'm going to get you a dress and a shawl and like different shoes and things like that. So I ended up wearing her clothes, and then at this point, I think I had called my parents over because I was very confused of what to do. And I was speaking to Mark. I had several phone calls on their deck with Mark being like, why would this lawyer be telling me this? I need proof that someone has spoken to the family. Like, basically, like, they're about to file an accusation. Like, if this is true, then this is going to really not be good for my husband. So he's basically trying to talk me off a ledge, telling me that we have a meeting. And at one point he said, sorry, the memories are hard, but at one point he said, the meeting's not happening at 10. It's going to happen later. I just don't know the time yet. And that's when I really lost it, because in my mind I was like, okay, well, if I'm meeting the family at 10, then everything he's saying is true. Like, everything's fine. But when then he told me that the meeting wasn't at 10, but it was going to be later, I really lost it. And at this point, he was in another vehicle, helping another family out with a problem. And so he wasn't able to talk too much. So he had other people from the community calling me. And again, he only spoke Spanish, so we could only get so far in our communication. So he had other English-speaking people in the community calling me, telling me that I need to trust him, that he's saying everything is okay. It's just not happening at 10. It's happening later today. Like, I need to calm down. And I was screaming and crying more than I ever have, because I just didn't know who to believe. And I just wanted the best for my husband. I remember even screaming at people on the phone that I didn't even know. Like, he had people calling me. I think their names sounded familiar because it is still a small town, but I had never met these people, and they're trying to calm me down. And I was just screaming at them, like, I need proof from Mark that somebody has spoken to the family. Like, I lost it more than I probably ever had. And at some point my parents walked in, and so Brian and his wife were trying to like fill them in on what was happening. And at some point, Mark called me back. It couldn't have been that much longer. It couldn't have been that much time that went by, but we were getting close to the 10 a.m. And Mark had called me back and said that you need to be at the courthouse. You need to go there immediately. You need to bring a translator. Call Sarah. Sarah was the one that initially was a translator for Mark and I, and see if she can meet you there. And the lawyers are going to meet you there as well. And so I was like, okay, I guess we're going to the courthouse. I didn't even know there was a courthouse in our town. So figured out where that was, called Sarah. She was available. She met us at the courthouse and the lawyers were there. I'm really trying to fit this day into this one video without this video being too long. Because I feel like it all needs to go together. So got to the courthouse, the two lawyers were there, Sarah was there, and all we did was go up to the window and they asked for the report, basically like the incident report, and they just read it out and she translated, and then that was that. Like, I didn't sign anything, nothing really occurred, and then we went over to the side and we're just talking to the lawyers. Basically, the lawyers were saying that because there's no judge in our town, we need to have my husband move to another town. This town is 2 hours away, not the next town over, where he can be seen by a judge there. And this judge situation comes up a lot. Basically, in Nicaragua, they recently let go hundreds of judges, and so many towns in Nicaragua do not have a judge. And like I said, this will come into play later on. But as they were talking to me, more and more red flags started coming out. My friend even wrote in my notes here that I don't even remember all of the red flags, but the ones I do remember is me basically being like, what's the proof that you have that you've spoken to the family? I have this other lawyer telling me that no one's contacted the family. And they just kept going on these tangents about how they know the family, and they even had a voice memo from the friend of the lawyers who knew the family, basically talking about how he had spoken to the family, how they're a wealthy family and they're not worried about the money right now. They're just getting through the funeral, and then we'll deal with that after, and that they do want to mediate, and they played the voice memo. And basically every question I had for them, and it went through Sarah, the translator, the answers were just not great. Like, Sarah was very much on board with these lawyers because she trusts Mark wholeheartedly. She's seen what he's done for other people in the community. Like, she was not wavering at all until we had this conversation with the lawyers, and question after question, I would say to her in English, like, does that really add up to you? Or are you seeing what I'm seeing? And eventually she was like, yeah, I am. So long story short, not so short, they told me that they had to go write up some documentation, and that we were going to meet at a restaurant, and they were going to type it up, and then I was going to sign it so that they could move my husband to this other town where there was a judge. And in that moment, my gut just told me no. So I told her to tell them that I needed to go check on my kids. I needed an hour, and that I would meet them at the restaurant. But instead, once we said goodbye to the lawyers and that we would meet them in an hour, I had a conversation with Sarah. I'm like, do you see what I'm seeing? Like, oh, at one point they even said that I could meet, they knew the uncle, and that I could meet, they would bring the uncle and I could meet him in person to verify that, of course, we've talked to the family. And I was like, how do I know that this person, this uncle, is even the real uncle? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. There's too many red flags. Like, will you come over with me to my neighbor's house, Brian? She didn't know Brian. Just so we can like talk this all through, because I don't know what the heck is happening anymore. And she agreed. So we got back to my neighbor's house, and I was explaining to, and Sarah was as well, like everything that just went down. And I can't remember at one moment, but there was a moment where I just snapped, and I was like, no, enough's enough. Like, I want you to call your lawyer, Michelle, and get her on board. Like, I just don't trust these guys anymore. And if what she's saying is true, then they're about to file an accusation, and we need to do something. So my neighbor called Michelle, who immediately was like, okay, we need to be in the next town over. Like, we need to go to this government office and sign something that we have an intent to mediate to stop this accusation. Like, you need to be out here immediately. So I got in the car with my mom and my neighbor, and we drove as fast as possible to the next town over. We got to this government office where she was standing there waiting for us. She already had like the paperwork ready to go. I signed it. I don't even really know what it was. I guess to say that we did want to mediate. We got back in the car, and she said, we're going to see the family. At this point, I was shocked because I didn't have any notice that I was going to see the family. We found out that we were going to show up at their house, and their house was only like a 5-minute drive away from where we were. While we were driving there, Mark was blowing up my phone and Sarah's phone as well. because again, he's friends with Sarah, and we just no-showed on these lawyers who were waiting at a restaurant for us to sign papers, but we just ignored their calls and showed up at the family's house. And Michelle, the lawyer, got out of the car, and we waited in the car, and she went over and told them that we were here and that we'd like to speak with them if they were open to it, and they were. And we walked into their house, and there were a lot of family members there. I want to say 10 to 15 family members there. They were all grieving, as you can imagine. This is another one that's really hard to talk about, but we all sat down in a circle, like a circle of chairs. And the mother of the man who passed away was across from me. And then there was a lot of other family members as well. A lot of the male family members. I remember there was one in particular who was quite angry when we started the conversation. And again, Michelle did a lot of the speaking and explained to them that, because as soon as we got in there, he's like, "Where have you been? Why haven't you contacted us?" And Michelle just explained to them like what had happened, that we had thought that somebody had already spoken to them, that what these lawyers had done, that we thought we had a meeting today at 10 a.m. She said Allison prepared a letter to reach you guys today at the meeting. Like, she was completely under the impression that not only had you guys been contacted, but that there was a meeting today. There were a lot of tears, and the mother was very receptive to what Michelle, the lawyer, was telling them. Luckily, I had the letter prepared in Spanish because I thought I was meeting with them anyways, and I asked to read the letter to them. And it was just basically a letter of condolences and on behalf of me and my husband. At one point, another family member who hadn't been in the room when Michelle was explaining why we hadn't reached out to them right away, he didn't hear that part. He came in towards the end of the letter and was furious, and just started saying a lot of really not nice things, but you know, it's they all just lost a loved one, and he didn't hear that part. So the mother and I guess aunts, I'm not sure, kind of moved him out of the room and was like, "You didn't hear this part." Like, she thought that we had been contacted. And so anyways, in the end, it went as well as it could have been. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. And I'm thankful that my mom was with me as well there. And we expressed that, you know, we would like to mediate if they're open to that. And they said that they would, but that they're just not ready right now, that they're grieving right now, which we totally respected. And as we were leaving, one of the family members, a sister, approached me and let me know that she speaks English. And so we ended up exchanging phone numbers, just in case. I don't even know why we exchanged phone numbers, to be honest. I think I was just so emotional and you know, wanted to do what I could. And so yeah, we exchanged phone numbers, and then we left, and we all went to like a little cafe just to talk about what happened, because I hadn't even really spoken to the lawyer since I hired her. Literally, you know, Brian called her up, we hired her, we went to this government building, we went to the family's house, and we just needed to like debrief. So this is when I basically told her everything that Mark and his lawyers had been telling me, and where I found out that everything I had been told was a lie. Well, first of all, they never contacted the family, and that's clear as day because I just met the family and they said to my face that no one had contacted them. So that was a complete lie. I found out that this man did not have a wife and children, that they were not related to the president, that they were not a wealthy family. Basically everything that Mark and his lawyers told me was a complete lie. During this time, Mark is blowing up my phone, completely just being like, why did you not show up to the lawyers? We have to go right now, or your husband's going to be in jail forever. Like, we need to move him right now. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. sending me messages like, we just talked to the family, they want X amount of money, but it has to happen today, like just absolutely blowing up my phone. And I was panicked because knowing that I had just been lied to about everything, I didn't want to tell them that I knew everything was a lie in that moment. Like I didn't want to rock the boat. I just wanted to move on with this new lawyer and like deal with that later. So Michelle, the new lawyer, helped me write a letter, like a message to the other lawyers, basically thanking them respectfully for their time, and that I've decided to go with another counsel. So that's the gist of what happened at the cafe. After that, we were driving back, and I was just feeling awful for my husband because he was under the impression that we had a meeting that morning at 10 a.m. And obviously 10 a.m. had come and long gone, and he had no communication. So my neighbor Brian and I stopped by the police station that he was being held at on the way back and asked to see him. Luckily, my neighbor, who speaks really great Spanish, was able to tell the police, who didn't want us to see my husband, like what had happened with the lawyer situation, and that we had new lawyers now and that we needed to update my husband, and they let us see him. And I remember him being in much greater spirits that day when he walked in, and it turns out he got a new cellmate who spoke English, and this cellmate's gonna come up a lot more in the future, but because he had somebody to speak to, he was just in way better spirits. And Brian and I sat down and told him, you know, what happened. I think, again, these conversations are not very long, so I didn't get into all the details, but he understood that there was some stuff that went down with the other lawyers, and that we have new counsel now, and that I had met the family. And yeah, just some side notes. I found out that they did have all his belongings, including his phone. So that part of the story had been a lie as well. I knew that the plan was to try and mediate the next day, and that once that was complete, it was very quick to get my husband released. I found out that I could bring him a mat to sleep on, like a very thin pad, because at this point he was only sleeping on concrete. What else? I contacted his work at this point because I needed to update them on what was happening to my husband and why he wasn't working. I had to go back and check on my kids because, again, they were home a lot, not knowing what was going on. My stepdad was not doing well. And yeah, that was the end of day 4. So I think I'm gonna stop it here because I've been recording for a long time. Hopefully this video isn't crazy long. And I'll be back for the next part after this.